Your grandfather's truck ran 300,000 miles on nothing but regular oil changes and the occasional filter swap. And here you are, 80,000 miles into a 2019 pickup, staring at an oil consumption warning and a repair estimate that reads like a mortgage payment. That's not bad luck. That's not neglect. That's engineering. Specifically, it's a set of decisions that automakers made, and continue to make, that fundamentally changed how long an engine is designed to survive. And the centerpiece of all of it? Aluminum. The material that was sold to you as the future. To be fair, and we have to be fair here, aluminum genuinely solved real problems. The shift away from cast iron engine blocks starting in the 1980s and accelerating hard through the 1990s and 2000s wasn't pure cynicism. Aluminum weighs roughly a third of what iron does. Swap an iron block for aluminum across an entire engine, and you can shed 100 to 150 pounds from the front of a vehicle. That improves fuel economy, it improves handling balance, it reduces emissions. These were real wins. The EPA was pushing stricter standards, consumers wanted better mileage, and aluminum delivered on both counts. Ford, GM, BMW, Toyota. Everybody moved in the same direction at roughly the same time because the engineering math made sense on paper. But here's what that paper didn't fully account for. Aluminum and iron don't just look different. They behave differently, fundamentally, physically differently. And those behavioral differences become your problem the moment the warranty expires. Every metal expands when it heats up and contracts when it cools down. The technical term is thermal expansion coefficient, and it measures how dramatically a material changes dimension as temperature swings. Cast iron has a thermal expansion coefficient of roughly 11 to 12 parts per million per degree Celsius. Aluminum, around 23, nearly double. So every single time you cold start your engine, and you do this hundreds of times a year, every bore, every cylinder wall, every surface inside that block is expanding and contracting at almost twice the rate it would in an iron engine. And it's doing this unevenly, because not all parts of the engine reach operating temperature at the same speed. The piston rings, which are usually steel or cast iron, not. Aluminum are expanding at a different rate than the bore they're riding in. The head bolts are cycling differently than the block they're threading into. Over thousands of thermal cycles, over years of cold starts and cool downs, that constant differential movement starts doing damage that you can't see, can't feel, and can't diagnose until it shows up as oil. Consumption or blow-by, or, worst case, a scored cylinder wall. This is what engineers call fretting wear, and it's dramatically more pronounced in aluminum engines than it ever was with iron. Let's talk about the oil consumption issue specifically, because this affects more vehicles than most people realize. The Subaru EJ series, the GM 5.3-liter V8, which has been in millions of trucks and SUVs, the BMW N62 V8, the Audi 2.0 TFSI, the Toyota 2GR FE in various Camrys and Highlanders. These are not obscure engines. These are engines that collectively power tens of millions of vehicles on the road right now. And a significant percentage of those engines develop oil consumption issues, often consuming a quart every 1,000 to 2,000 miles, before the vehicle hits 100,000 miles. On a relatively new vehicle, with an engine that has no other obvious symptoms, here's what's actually happening. As those cylinder walls wear, faster than iron because of the reasons we just discussed, the piston rings can no longer maintain an adequate seal. Oil gets past the rings, enters the combustion chamber, burns off with the fuel mixture. You don't see blue smoke necessarily, because catalytic converters are very good at masking that. You just see your oil level dropping between changes. And if you're not checking it, and most people don't check between scheduled services anymore because they trust the monitoring systems, you can run the engine dangerously low without realizing it. Think about that for a second. The same engineering advancement that made your car more fuel efficient also made it less tolerant of the passive maintenance habits that worked perfectly fine for 50 years. There's a specific reason cast iron cylinder walls are so wear resistant, and it's not mystical, it's material science. Cast iron contains graphite in its microstructure, naturally as part of what cast iron fundamentally is. That graphite acts as a built-in lubricant at the micro level. It fills in tiny surface irregularities, helps maintain an oil film even under extreme load, and resists the abrasive wear that comes from thousands of combustion events per minute. Aluminum has none of that. Bare aluminum is actually soft, too soft to function as a cylinder wall at all. So manufacturers developed solutions. Nickel coating, a nickel silicon carbide plating applied to the bore surface, was used extensively in the 90s and early 2000s, particularly by BMW, Porsche, and Ferrari. It worked well, unless you used fuel with elevated sulfur content, which reacted chemically with the nickel and destroyed the coating from the inside. Ask anyone who owned an early M62-powered BMW about their repair bills. The more modern solution is bore liner insertion, pressing cast iron sleeves into an aluminum block. This is genuinely effective. Honda, Toyota, and some GM applications use this approach, and it does meaningfully extend cylinder wear life. But it adds cost and complexity, and not every manufacturer does it on every engine. The ones that don't are giving you a harder wear surface, like Alusil, which uses hyper-eutectic aluminum with silicon. But it's still not the same wear resistance you get from iron or a properly installed liner. Now I want to be precise here, because this is not a condemnation of every modern engine ever built. There are aluminum block engines with genuinely excellent longevity records. The Toyota 1GR FE V6, the Honda K series, the Subaru FA series, notably better than the EJ it replaced. The Ford Coyote 5.0 has shown solid long-term durability in most applications. These engines exist, they work, and calling all aluminum engines failures is oversimplifying something nuanced. What we're really talking about is a spectrum. On one end, you have well-engineered aluminum engines with proper bore liners, high-quality thermal management, and conservative design tolerances. These can absolutely reach 200,000 hours to 250,000 miles with proper maintenance. On the other end, you have cost-optimized engines built to hit price points and pass emission tests, where the engineering decisions that protect long-term durability got traded away for short-term margins. And the market is absolutely full of those. The direct injection era made this worse in some ways. GDI engines run significantly higher combustion temperatures and pressures than port-injected engines. That thermal stress accelerates the wear cycles we've been talking about, and it introduces carbon buildup on intake valves that port injection never caused, because the fuel no longer washes the backs of those valves clean on every intake stroke. So you get an aluminum block engine running hotter, wearing faster, and building carbon deposits, all simultaneously. Okay, so now you know why this happens. Let's talk about what it actually means for how you treat your engine, because this information is useless if it just makes you anxious without giving you tools. First, oil change intervals matter more in an aluminum engine than they ever did in an iron one. The thermal cycling we discussed accelerates oil oxidation and breakdown. The factory oil life monitor systems in most vehicles are calibrated for average driving conditions. If you do a lot of short trips, cold start driving, or towing, your actual oil degradation outpaces the monitor's estimate. Real-world guidance from engineers who actually study this: 5,000 miles or 6 months on conventional oil, 7,500 on full synthetic, regardless of what the dashboard says, if you're driving hard. Second, let the engine warm up. Not the old-school idle for 10 minutes in the driveway method, which wastes fuel and causes its own problems. But don't hammer a cold engine. For the first 2 to 3 minutes after startup, keep RPMs under 2,500. Let the oil circulate. Let the metal reach closer to operating temperature before you ask it to work hard. That reduces the differential expansion stress on the cold bore during the highest wear portion of every drive. Third, check your oil level manually between changes. Monthly. Takes 40 seconds. If you're losing more than half a quart between 5,000-mile intervals, you have the beginning of a consumption issue. Catching it early can be the difference between a $1,200 repair and an $8,000 engine rebuild. Fourth, if your vehicle has a GDI engine without port injection as a secondary system, consider a periodic intake valve cleaning around every 40,000 to 50,000 miles. Walnut blasting is the professional method. This doesn't fix bore wear, but it prevents the carbon buildup issue from compounding the thermal stress problems. Here's where I want to land this. The aluminum shift wasn't a conspiracy. It was an engineering compromise made under real regulatory and market pressure, and it produced genuine benefits. Lighter vehicles, better fuel economy, reduced emissions. The problem isn't that manufacturers chose aluminum. The problem is that some of them chose aluminum and then engineered to a cost instead of a standard. And the problem is that nobody really explained to consumers that this trade-off existed. You were sold progress. What you got was progress, with fine print. And the fine print says your engine needs more attentive maintenance, more frequent oil changes, and more respect during warm-up than your grandfather's truck ever did. That's not a reason to panic. It's a reason to pay attention. Because an aluminum engine that's maintained correctly, genuinely correctly, not just oil change every 10,000 miles when the light comes on, can still deliver a long, reliable service life. The people who understand what we've talked about today are the ones whose engines make it to 200,000 miles. The people who don't are the ones funding the remanufactured engine industry. You now know the difference. Use it. If this kind of content is useful to you, the actual engineering behind why things fail, not just what to do when they do, there's a lot more coming. I'm working through the major failure patterns across modern powertrains, including the direct injection carbon problem we touched on today, and a breakdown of why modern automatic transmissions are failing at rates nobody wants to talk about officially. Subscribe if you want that when it drops. And genuinely, drop a comment below with the make, model, and year of your engine, and tell me if you've dealt with oil consumption. I'm tracking which platforms are seeing this most in the real world, and your data actually informs what I cover next.